Hey guys, welcome to another live show, another live She Knows Arsenal on this wonderful Friday morning/afternoon. Make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel on your way in. And let's really get into it. Let me put up the comments. I don't know if I like this feature so much as I thought I would at first, but I guess we'll continue it. Let's see. There, your comments will show up on the screen. Yeah. So, and of course, the dogs want to play now. As soon as I get started, they've been sleeping the whole time I've been putting together the stream, and now they want to play, of course. But listen, how are we feeling? What are we thinking? I love to get your guys' thoughts and feelings in the chat. This is my show, but it's also your show. And I want to give the most recent updates on some of our transfer business, especially for the people that were not here yesterday evening. It was a random show that I had done post the Spain France game. And so if you didn't get an opportunity to be a part of that stream, I wanted to make sure I came on today to give the most recent updates on our transfer business. So we will go ahead and get into that. I have some new information or new updates on Cesco, Rodrygo, Kepa, and the Greek Messi. So we'll get into all of that. Just some quick kind of like small kind of stuff to just get it out of the way. Gabriel has signed a new deal at Arsenal. I think the deal is running until 2030. So the first contract extension of the summer, or the first contract extension under Andrea Berta, is Gabriel Magalhaes, which is, I think, really, really good. You know, I think it's not that I was scared that he wouldn't stay. I just think that it's just important to tie down our important players. There was a weird time at the beginning of last season where he wasn't starting, and there was Saudi bids and all type of shit. And losing Gabriel would be a huge loss. I think probably like most up there with Saka, maybe one or two other players, maybe. But Gabriel to me is like a part of the furniture now. He feels very much so ingrained in Arsenal. His family feels invested in Arsenal, and it just doesn't feel right when he's not there. You know, I think we saw the level of drop off, even though Kivior did so well. The level of drop off from him, you know, from Gabriel to Kivior is still quite vast. And so he is 100% one of the first names on the team sheet, one of the core group, the spine, whatever you want to call it, the first, you know, player of this said project, in my opinion, under Mikel Arteta. That is his, not his first signing, but what we would call his first major signing. And so I'm happy to see him renew with Arsenal. Not like I thought it was under jeopardy or anything, but our center back pairing is our crown jewel, in my opinion, in terms of what differentiates us from the rest. I think a lot of other teams would love to have the center back pairing that we have. And obviously Saliba is a big part of that, but Gabriel is also equally as important, you know, so it's really nice to see that he is re-upped. Now, there's also said to be movement or positive talks with Saliba and also Saka that's coming from Sammy McBell. And so nothing is done there. But if we are able to lock down, which we know we're going to lock down Saka, but Saliba, that's also a good indicator of how the players actually feel about the project. I think I would be frightened if Saliba did not sign a new deal, almost like waiting to get that free transfer to Real Madrid per se, that I think a lot of us are kind of afraid of. So if he re-ups, then I think we know that he feels like the club is moving in the right direction. He still feels like there's work to be done. And so positive moves on those. Also, still talks with Trossard for some sort of extension and pay increase, which I still don't really understand that really. But yeah, I think, you know, that to me, you know, it's not really a positive or a negative, but it's a something. Jorginho is gone. He did his medical for Flamingo. We know he's gone. And so, yeah, there's movement on the contract extensions. I'm sure we'll hear something about Ethan, MLS soon as well. Those are two other players that need to be locked down to new contracts in the type of contracts of first team players. So I think we'll see something on them, with them as well. But there's a lot of work, that Berta has to do coming straight in. It's not just regular first team transfer business. It's also locking down these players that we need to maintain in the side. So yeah, I think that's really good news, before we get into like new players. Locking down, players that we have is super, super important. Jagoon says things are heating up, thankfully. And Big Gabby extending is great for morale. Nuances says Arteta must scratch the Chelsea itch. At least it's Kepa, not Nkunku. Fingers crossed. The Eddie says Trossard over 30. So not sure if the 1-year contract limit still applies under Berta. Honestly, I don't. We'll know a lot more about Berta after this window and maybe even the next one, because he I don't think he shies away from older players the way that maybe we had done in the past. And so maybe he's not afraid to give somebody like Trossard, who's 30, maybe he sees his value in the squad as more than what the fans do, So we'll know more about how Berta sees the squad and how we're building the squad moving forward. But if his time at Atletico gives you any indication of how he feels about older players, then I think you can say with certainty, at least from that perspective, like from experience that we could see, he's not afraid of older players. So yeah, Travis says, I would sell Saliba if he doesn't resign. We can't lose him on a free. Foxy says, Greek Messi is outrageous. I hope people drop that ASAP. Otherwise, he doesn't stand a chance. Listen, that's what people are calling him. So that's what he is on the title. Alistair Ben says, signing Big Gabby is as important as any signing we can do in the summer. Terrence says, in the history of football, there has never been a top class Greek player. Listen, that's what they're calling him. I don't know what to tell you guys. Millen says sacking Arteta should be the number one priority. Who do we sign? Who we sign does not matter. I think it does matter. I mean, we're not sacking Mikel Arteta. And this is, I think, the issue that we have is that, albeit like a lot of fans are, I wouldn't even say a lot, I would say a section of the fan base is unhappy with Mikel Arteta. But I still think that there is maybe a little bit of like maybe a misunderstanding about how small that section actually is. The section of the fans that actually would need to agitate in order for Mikel to go is much bigger than the section that want him gone. And so it does matter, because even if you want a new manager to come in, you don't want them to come in when we're 8th or without good players coming in. I think as an Arsenal fan, regardless to if you like Mikel or not, you want quality players to come in, because if he were to get sacked, don't you want another manager to have to be able to work with better players, not to be hamstrung by players that are not talented or not good enough to play or whatever. So it's, for me, it's more about Arsenal than Mikel. Of course, the players matter, because even outside of, Arteta's not going to win anything, we still need to continue to bring in quality players, because if he does leave, you don't want the squad to be full of players that are hard to use, like whatever's happening at Manchester United. Amorim couldn't even get that team out of 17th or 15th or whatever it was. So I think the players do matter. I think the Arteta conversation is one of it's almost moot at this point. He's not going. And so, yes, the players absolutely matter. I want quality players in here, whether he's here or not. Space Time says, I do think everyone is clocking next season is make or break for him. We shall see. This fan base to me is not one that agitates quickly. I think we think it is because, one, The Athletic has already put out an article saying that, word or, narratives around him needing to win a trophy next season are far from the mark in regards to how the board feels. And, the people that actually would do the hiring and firing don't feel like he needs to win a big trophy next season. That is a narrative built up by the fans. Now, if the fans were to agitate enough where they would stop buying merchandise, they would stop going to games, and they would, if they were at games protesting, then yes, that would matter. But do you actually think this fan base is going to do that? Do you? Do you know our fan base? It's one of the most forgiving, patient, and or apathetic fan bases out there. So yeah, it's, to me, further than people think it is. So yeah, the players to me do matter. Jordan says sacking Arteta will change nothing. Might as well stick with him. This ownership have made Berta look like he's a C tier sporting director, despite him being A tier because of the board's slowness. So yeah, but listen, we can, it's just, it is what it is. Arteta's going to be the manager at the beginning of the season. So, there are plenty of, I mean, obviously I want you guys to be here and I love this community, but if you are more kind of like interested in Arteta out conversations, there are plenty of, channels that you can go to that consistently talk about those things. I want to get into the transfers, so let's go ahead and get started. Make sure you guys are liking the video, subscribing to the channel. What is this? Kivior talking. I just want to see if he had said anything important. No, he didn't. So let's go ahead and start with Cesco. Probably the biggest news of today is Fabrizio Romano has gone onto his Instagram and Twitter to kind of, give us an update on what's going on with Cesco. Now, up until about a couple of days ago, it wasn't really as clear as it is now who Arsenal were more interested in. It was still Arsenal trying to decide. Then maybe 2 days ago, Fabrizio Romano said that Arsenal are, talking or in concrete discussions. Now he's saying that Arsenal are advancing in negotiations for Benjamin Sesko after initial concrete talks reported last week. Discussions are underway and proceeding well between all parties involved, players and clubs. No agreement yet now or expected this weekend, but advancing. They also asked him not to go to national team duty with Slovenia so that they can finish this deal. Obviously, it's not done. And hearing the words like advancing and concrete initial talks, whatever, isn't that exciting. But I think the most important thing now is we know who we've chosen. And now you can start planning beyond that, knowing that it's Cesco and that's who we're most likely going to get, paints a clear picture of what our attack is going to look like next season and what the left wing needs to look like. And now everybody's obviously piggybacking, and I'll read some of the stuff that, other people are saying off of that. Pletty Goal or whatever his name is, he loves retweets and shit. I'm telling you, this guy is fucking loving it. He knows if he says something about Arsenal, he is getting so many retweets. But he said that Benjamin Sesko is now keen on a move to Arsenal. Negotiations with the player are progressing positively. There has been clear progress in discussions over personal terms, but no full agreement has been reached yet. So, and Arsenal are not under any pressure. And I had read something else about basically Berta was using the Gyökeres deal or the Gyökeres interest as a way to, bring the fee down for Cesco. Because originally, remember when, we originally were talking about Cesco, the feeling was that it was going to cost you like 93 million. And I remember a lot of Arsenal fans were running with that figure, and especially because they didn't want him. So they're like, we're going to spend 93 million on this guy. That's shit. But it was never going to be 93 million. And the whole idea of us choosing between Cesco and Gyökeres, I think, was a negotiation, more of like a negotiation tactic. Like, this is not the only thing we're looking at. Because, like, think about, like normal negotiations in life. If you ever negotiated anything, you don't want to act like this is the only option that you have. If you do, then they feel like they can jack up the price. But if you're there and you're like, well, we could just go with Gyökeres, and Gyökeres is going to cost us 60 million. So, we're really not filling this 80 million pound price tag or whatever. Then, especially if you have the player and you think the player really wants to come to you, then, you can negotiate a little bit more positively. And so I don't want to say 100% that Gyökeres was used as a ploy for negotiations, but I can see a world where, a seasoned negotiator, a seasoned sporting director would utilize something like that to balance it out a little bit more. And so we're going with Cesco. I know that there's a lot of Arsenal fans that are going to be really disappointed in that. And I get it. I totally understand it. It's not who a lot of people want, and that's fair enough. I'm not one of those people. I really like Cesco. I think he's a really good player. So we'll see how it let's see how it goes. Mix Mitchell says Sesko falls in line with Arteta's fetish with players that look more like NBA athletes. I'll be honest though, I mean, I think, Arteta gets a lot of crap about wanting tall players, but if there's one player on my team that I do want to be tall, it's my striker. I'm really not going to be upset about my striker being 6'5". I'm really, really not. So I think we can give him a pass for that. And even with Cesco, he's not somebody with a trampoline touch. He's not somebody running around with Timberland boots. He's actually quite techie for a big player. So I think that's fine, That for this particular position, I'm okay with them being tall. Do you know what I mean? Callie says, how tall is Cesco? 6'5". Yes, 6'5". Um, let's see. Mark says, I'm beyond excited for Cesco. He can be one of the best in the world. Rock says, Gyökeres was never the first choice. The Eddie says, at this point, sign Cesco, but better make sure he's not the only attacking signing we will need on that left based on Cesco's output. Definitely need more than just that for sure. Let's see. Terry Tibbs says, Moxed Mitchell thinks a white guy looks like an NBA player. I don't think that's what he means. I think he just means like Arteta loves these really kind of like tall guys. And I hear it. I don't really buy into the idea that we need everybody to be these super tall skyscrapers. We definitely need more tech in the team, but I'm totally okay with my striker being, strong and tall and athletic. G. Will says, we can't score goals, so why not choose the goal machine like Gyökeres? I'm gonna be really honest with you guys. I think our desperation for a 25 goal per season striker is making people probably ignore clear kind of like cons for this player. That's not to say that I don't think Gyökeres can improve us. I do, and he was my number one choice to a certain extent. But if you're saying that you don't have any concerns about his goals translating, or the fact that there's so many top teams that need a striker right now and none of them are really going for him except for us in Man United, to me that's a red flag. I don't know if like maybe, and I was talking to a friend about this, I was like, maybe the data team has the Portuguese league and the goals translating as a something I'm sure they have some sort of risk analysis that they do at this stage in football. I'm pretty sure that they have some way of measuring the risk and how risky a signing will be. And I just have a feeling that top clubs have moving from the Portuguese league to another league as a huge red flag or risk. And so with the fee associated and the wages associated, maybe the top clubs don't see him as big of a slam dunk as maybe we do. I think it's disingenuous to have a conversation about Cesco and Gyökeres, and I have people not even putting that out there and not even acknowledging that, just because Cesco had like 15 goals this season and Gyökeres has 40 goals this season. You have to take into account that the only player that has come from the Portuguese league, a striker, and they've come to the big five leagues and performed at the same rate, is Falcao. That has to come in your thinking in some way. And I feel like a lot of people not even bringing that up makes me think that it's just more about the vanity of signing somebody with so many goals rather than well, are we 100% sure? I do think both of them have pros and cons and they need to both be weighed out, you know? So Mr. says, I think Darwin Nunez has scared people off of the Portuguese league strikers. I do. I think that I have to imagine that that's a reason why no other top teams are going for him. It's because it's not just us. It's Chelsea's not going for him. Liverpool are not really going for him. There's other top sides in Europe that are looking for a striker. And it kind of like it's just us and Man United. And to me, that is a red flag. Is it something that would make me not go for Gyökeres? No, because the striker market is what it is. Basically, the only two options that we do have are Sesko and Gyökeres. But I can't really be that upset with the club for going for Cesco, knowing that there's a huge red flag on Gyökeres. It is a huge red flag, So yeah. Let's see. Give me 2 seconds. I'm just checking something. Give me 2 seconds. People are saying just hijack the Turkey deal. I think that's pretty much out of the question. There is no hijacking that deal, is it? Just give me 2 seconds. I'm just checking something. I also need water. Okay. So, Boyce says, sorry. Dio has said, I hope Gyökeres goes to United because I will be there when the Scammerine is playing Obi Martins instead of him. I'm just saying that there's pros and cons to both, and I don't think it's as much of a slam dunk. I mean, James said it the best, and you guys know I love James B, and I think that his analysis is usually pretty spot on. But if the main reason for me wanting Gyökeres is mostly due to the fact that I want to get Kai Havertz out of the team, I don't know if that's the best indication of the player, because when I watch the two players play, I like Cesco's the way he plays better. I like his stature. I like his athleticism. The main thing I like about Gyökeres is that I feel like he's older, more established, and so Arteta will have no choice but to bring him into the team right away. But that's pretty much like the main thing. The goals are great as well, but I do believe that Sesko will score a lot of goals for us. So, you know what I mean? That's toxic. You know, that's really toxic for one of my main reasons. Like when I'm writing down my pros and cons, I'm like, okay, Arteta will not be able to sit Gyökeres on the bench. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's a little toxic. Do you know what I mean? But I have probably more of like a line in the sand when it comes to the left wing than I do with the striker. You know, I just want a really good striker. I want somebody who looks like they are or can be the guy. I'm more concerned about that. I think if you get a good striker in our team, they'll score goals. I think Marino shows that. I think Kai Havertz shows that. So why would I believe that somebody who's a natural number 9 that can hit through the ball, that has the instincts in the box, that does a lot with a little, for people that are like, we don't create enough chances. Do you guys see Cesco takes like less touches in the box than Kai Havertz and scores just as many goals? Like, you know what I mean? He's good, you know, so, but if he flops, you guys can come back here and say, Jess, you are so stupid. And that's fine. I'll take it. I will take that L, you know? John says, hope Gyökeres doesn't make us regret not getting him. That player doesn't look like some typical Portuguese player. I mean, he doesn't. He doesn't look like a typical Portuguese player because he's white and Swedish, you know, but he I would be very concerned. I mean, look, listen, one of the reasons why I trust the Zubi signing so much is one, because I'm watching it with my own 2 eyes and I see a good player, but 2, there are too many people that have good opinions, that are good coaches and or people in the game that rate him for him to be shit. There's too many green flags. And one of the biggest green flags for me is if Liverpool are looking at that player or want that player, because Liverpool have very few, in my opinion, duds. Players that, you know, Manchester United's transfer, you know, group get things wrong all the time. So if Manchester United want that player, I'm more concerned than if Liverpool want that player. If Chelsea and Liverpool need a striker and neither one of them are going for the guy with 100 goals, and other teams across Europe as well need a striker and they're not going for him, but the only team that's like super desperate for him is Man United, I'm scared about that. I'm scared about that. And I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie, because Liverpool wanting Zubimendi made me want him more, because I know that they get most things right. Not everything. They got Darwin Nunez wrong. They also got there's another like midfielder that they had that really was like shit and was injured all the time. It wasn't Thiago. He was also injured, but there was like another one. I forget his name, but for the most part, they get almost everything right. And so to me, that's a red flag. That doesn't mean that he's not going to work out. And he definitely, you know, he's definitely better than Højlund. So if Man United get him, they'll definitely improve. But, you know, for us, we need to make sure we get it right. Keita, exactly. He was shocking, and he was shocking. Fabricio says, "Isn't it pretty much nailed on that we're getting Cesco?" I think so. I think so. Now, when will it get done? I don't know, but the fact that they're keeping him away from um they're keeping him away from international duty, I think is pretty big, So there's that. Um Keeping him away from international duty, we're definitely in talks, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. Let's see. Former Juventus head of scouting Matteo Tognazzi is set to strengthen Andrea Berta's team. Deal in principle agreed until 2028. As per 89 Longo, I guess his name is. The highest profile transfers during his tenure were Dean Huijsen and Kenan Yildiz on a free transfer. So I'm happy that he's getting more people on his team. No more Ito for me. Let's see. Just making sure I'm not missing anything. So yeah, Cesco, I think it's Cesco. But we will see. We will see how things go. This is going to be a crazy season. There's so many narratives already built up. We already know it's going to be Turkey versus Wirtz. You already know that if United get Gyökeres and we get Sesko, that's going to be a huge thing as well, because so many Premier League teams are going for the same players. You know how it goes, so it's going to be Declan Rice and Caicedo all over again. So we shall see. And for the most part, I think we've come out on top of most of those, haven't we? So we'll see how it goes. I can't deny Man United are a good example for where signing a good player for the wrong system hurts both the player and the club. So no Gyökeres could be a blessing, but it could also be good for them, because that's the exact system that he played at Sporting, and Amorim has already showed that despite not having the players for that system, he is going to play that three-back system no matter what. And he's buying players to play in that system, so much so that they're even considering selling Kabi Menu, which is a player that they thought that they were going to build around for, the next 10, 20 years or whatever. Not 10, 20 years, I'm being dramatic, but like 10 years, right? And so there is a world where Sesko works out for us and Gyökeres works out for them, and we're both happy, but that's not how it works in football social media. In social media, there's a winner and a loser. There's never a winner and a winner. Like, I think both Chelsea and Arsenal have won with Declan Rice and Caicedo. I think the right players went to the right places. Yet and still, it's either one player is super shit and the other player is good, and vice versa. So we already know there's going to be a winner and a loser, So there you go. So let's see. So Rodrygo, John says Rodrygo informed Madrid that he wants to stay. There's information about that yesterday saying that he wants to leave. And then I also saw stuff that he wants to stay maybe like a week ago. So we'll just have to wait on that. I don't see anything yet, unless you guys want to tell me if it's new information. Then let me know and I'll pull it up. But for the most part, all I've really seen is maybe like a week ago, they had said that he wanted to stay. And then last night, the information coming from Hand of Arsenal and another, journalist was that he wanted to leave. So we shall see. So yeah, Foxy says Caicedo outstanding yesterday again versus Brazil. Yeah, again, there's a world where they got the player that they were supposed to get and we got the player we were supposed to get. There's never been a single moment where I have regretted having Declan Rice. So yeah. Jordan says, according to reports, Berta agrees with Arsenal moving for Cesco. Apparently, he likes his profile. I think Berta sees the left winger position as a bigger priority, hence Rodrygo interest. Left wing is definitely like a very important position. Also I know this is like very much so sidebar, but I just need to put this out here just in case this person is watching or people are watching. I saw the comment yesterday about my stream being too long. It was a stream where I came in late. and they were like, not really complaining, but, saying that the stream is very long and, I should break it down. I do live streams because this is what we've always done. It works for us. The majority of my community likes live streams, and I make them longer so that just in case you don't make it at the beginning, you can catch up. But for people that don't like super long live streams, I will try to do either chapters. I'll either do chapters or I will make clips. It's just hard because I do have like a lot of work. So sometimes it's difficult for me to do those things, like extra things. I just kind of try to make sure I do something. But I will try to do at least chapters so that you can just fast forward to what you want to see. But I'm not doing super live streams for no reason. I'm doing it because that's what the community majority of them likes and that's what they're used to. So I just wanted to put that out there for like new people that are like, what the fuck? Why is she on here for so long? It's like, that's what we do here, man. All right, so moving on. Cesco, we got that done. Now, Kepa, no, actually, let's go into the Rodrygo stuff. I haven't seen anything new since yesterday, but just in case you weren't here yesterday, on Cesco, or sorry, Rodrygo, he's supposed to be our top target. And that is coming from Hand of Arsenal. If you don't know who Hand of Arsenal is, basically the new AFC Bell. No, I'm just joking. But basically, since maybe last summer, Hand of Arsenal has been one of the most like well respected and reliable in the knows. And his information is also being kind of like underpinned or confirmed by Sky Sports. So it's not just Hand of Arsenal, but Sky Sports is also saying, at the very least, not really the information around Rodrygo wanting to leave and all this kind of stuff, but in terms of him being our number one target, that has been confirmed and reiterated by Sky Sports multiple times. So we know to a certain extent, Rodrygo is our number one option for left wing, and that at some point soon we are going to find out whether he wants to actually leave or not. So yeah, that's pretty much where we are with that. Now, the fee that they were talking about yesterday was around 67 million pounds, rising up to about 80 million pounds would be the entire package. That is chump change for a player of his levels. I personally think that that is a snip. We need to spend that type of money on this type of player. That's kind of how I feel. Now, a good second choice would be Nico Williams, but he's lost his mind and has decided that he wants 300,000 pounds a week. And the whole release clause needs to be paid up front. And Bilbao are trying to renew his contract. They are trying to keep him like imprisoned there. So I don't know if we'll be able to get him out, but Rodrygo would be the best option to go for first. And if for some reason we can't get him, then move down the list. A player that has come forward in that list, which I just never really saw coming, was Morgan Rogers. Now, it is going to be, unless we are a serious club, it is going to be next to impossible to get Morgan Rogers out of Aston Villa. You're going to have to pay over. You think paying for Declan Rice was going to be crazy. Think about Morgan Rogers, because you're going to, they're not going to let us, they're just not going to let us just have him. Even if they're going through money troubles, they'll try to sell those other players before they sell basically what I would consider their crown jewel, probably their best player, their most. Do you guys agree with that? I feel like that's their best player is Morgan Rogers from he's young, he's exciting. You could see him moving up to a better side. I think that's their crown jewel. So they're going to want like 100 million for him. Let's be honest. The whole package is probably going to cost about 100 million. He's English, he's young, and you're doing Premier League club to Premier League club. So I didn't anticipate him being on the list, especially because he's not a traditional winger. But instead of going for a subpar option on the wing, I would actually prefer Arsenal to just throw the bag at a really talented player that at least gives us X factor. And I feel like that's why he's on the list, because at that stage, if you have like 80 million to spend, I'd prefer you to, if you can't get Rodrygo, to maybe spend that on Morgan Rogers, then just get Zane or, no offense to him, but like go get Ademola Lookman or whatever. I would, yeah, so yeah, I think Morgan Rogers is an interesting choice, but my number one choice would be Rodrygo. From a experience standpoint, I think we need to look at players with Champions League, experience to some extent. He has vast Champions League experience. He's won things before. He's been in an elite team before. He needs a place where he can spread his wings and become the guy to a certain extent, because obviously Saka is still the guy, but the guy, we can offer him the 10 shirt. You need to offer him 300,000 pounds a week. You need to give him the whole thing, and offer him, the opportunity to become the player he's meant to be. Because I remember when him and Vinny first got there, the narrative around the two players was that Vinny is good, but Rodrygo is more talented. And I'm not quite sure that that's how it's panned out, because they gave Vinny the wing. Rodrygo is somebody that can also play in the 10 for us. So for people that are really frustrated with, Rodrygo would be a good option, because if we don't end up getting a number 10, he can play in the 10 role. He can play just right off the striker as well. So he's a really good option that we should be pushing for. And when we say he can be like Alexis, I don't think people are saying from a playing style standpoint, because they're two completely different players. But from like lifting the levels, pre-Alexis and post-Alexis are two different Arsenal sides. You have a player, him and Ozil were on the same level, and we had players that were not on that same level but looked better because they were in a team with Alexis and Ozil. I feel like, obviously, I don't think that the players that we have are shit, but I do think that you need those types of players to lift the group all together. He's definitely one of those players. So yeah, let's get him. If you can't, we'll go to the next options. But I want to see them try. Kilme says Vinny is mentally so strong. Yeah, he is very strong. I think Vinny is definitely a special player and very strong mentally. I do think that sometimes his emotions do get the best of him, but I think that is the Brazilian way. I don't know very many Brazilians that are not passionate. Most of them play on their emotions, and their emotions and their passion are the ways that they are able to push to that next level, where other nations use efficiency or tactical footballing IQ, things like that. Brazil plays on their passion. They are the passion merchants, right? And so I do think Vinny is a very strong mentally player, because he goes through so much, but he needs to channel his passion and his emotions to making him better on the pitch, and not being such a his outbursts, I feel like, are now starting to detract from his talent. And I think that that's a negative thing. Nabi says, yes, Wenger by again. Tibby, or sorry, not Tibby. I was looking at Nabi, and then I saw Tibbs, and I said just Tibby. So sorry. Terry Tibbs says, when we signed Rosicky from Germany, we should have signed Berbatov instead. Millen says, Guler is better. Rodrygo is another Jesus. Fair enough. I mean, whatever player, I feel like we're at a stage with certain people, no offense to you, where no matter who we sign, you should have signed the other person. If we were signing Gyökeres, you'd be saying sign Cesco. If we were signing Guler, you'd say why not Rodrygo? I think we've reached that point with people, because as good as Guler is, he's not available, but acting like Rodrygo is just some bum doesn't really, come on, like, no. King says, Sporting Lisbon believe Gyökeres would choose Arsenal if he was able to choose which club to join this summer via John Cross. I did see that. I'm sure he would. But listen, what looks like we're going Cesco, but if you love us and, you want to do us a favor, take your ass to Juventus and don't go United, because I'm really not trying to see you here next. I just don't want the narrative, but you just know he'll probably end up there, won't he? Let's see. Callie says, you guys are talking to each other. Chola says, Jess, the best signing for me will be Morgan Rogers, Rodrygo, Sesko, Kepa. I'll be fine. I mean, I don't know if I actually see us signing both Morgan Rogers and Rodrygo. I do think there is a limit to the spending when you start looking at how much it's going to cost for Sesko, Rodrygo, and Zubi. You're already scratching 200,000 pounds. Sorry, not 200,000, 200 million pounds. And so what are the chances that I know that they said that we could break our transfer record, but do you see us plopping 80 million on top of that? maybe even more. I don't know. So I think getting 3 big signings is a really good summer window for Arsenal. I know we'd love to do more, but I do think there's a limit to the spending. 3 big signings and probably 2 smaller signings, maybe even just 1 with the goalkeeper. I'm not getting my hopes up for an additional big signing on top of Zubi, Sesko, and maybe even Rodrygo. Nabi says Rodrygo, really Freddie Ljungberg. There was fast and then gone boom. Yes, I take Matoma over Rodrygo. Matoma is the quintessential option. Everyone else is the backup. I know you love him, bro. I know you love him. Like I know you love Matoma just like you love Jonathan David, just like you love Xavi Simmons. I know you love those players. Space and Time says, are United just straight up giving up on Højlund, 72 million pounds just down the drain just like that? Can I be honest about this? Like United get it wrong a lot. And it's funny and it's been nice to see. But one thing am like a slightly jealous about, slightly, and we will, take this, we will erase this from the records once I say this. But I do kind of like that they fail quickly. And when they have a player that doesn't work out, they kind of get rid and they keep buying. Now they keep buying wrong. But with Arsenal, there is kind of like, I think, a reluctancy to get things wrong or take risks because if they don't get it right, they don't think they're going to buy again. And I would like Arsenal to fail faster with certain signings, like take a risk. If it doesn't, take an educated risk, meaning not just something that you just know is not going to work, but bring in players and almost do too much. And then if it doesn't work, get rid quickly. Don't just keep them around. But what we tend to do is like just keep it, for instead of keeping them for 2 seasons, we keep them for 3 or 4, which is why Sambi's still on the books, which why Fabio's still on the books, stuff like that. And United are doing the right thing. They're in trouble. They've had a terrible season. And instead of trying to make Højlund work or trying to make him into a backup, or they're just getting rid. They spent 72 million to get rid, and they're going to buy a new striker, and I think that's the right thing to do. Now that I said that, strike it from the record. Ian White says, Jess, you're spot on. All I've seen is Arsenal fans on YouTube crying because you're a way to do what they want by a proper 9, but hella crying because it's not the 9 they specifically want. And listen, I'm known to have the meltdown. They're still here on the channel. Meltdown over Jorginho, meltdown over not getting Mudryk. Both of those you can say I was completely wrong. Even like when we were signing Trossard and we were meant to be getting Mudryk, I remember specifically saying Trossard is a Tottenham level player, right? And so I was wrong about all those things. I do give people grace, just a little bit of grace on that, just because we feel like we're under pressure and people are tired of losing and tired of like not winning trophies. And so when you're in that situation, I do think you do things that maybe are out of character or you are so stressed out that you just don't think straight. So it's like the only way to win is to have a striker that is going to score 25 goals per season. And right now they cannot see it with Cesco because he's young and he hasn't reached that, but Gyökeres seems like the perfect option. And then also your rivals are chirping in your ears saying, oh, if you guys get Cesco instead of Gyökeres, you guys are wrong. You guys are shit. You guys are this. You guys are that, right? And so I just think there's a lot of noise around it. There's a lot of people saying that we just need a 25 goal per season striker. And so I want to give them grace on that because I do understand the stress and the aggravation around being an Arsenal fan right now. That being said, I don't hold the same opinion because Gyökeres does have a huge red flag on him, and I think they're kidding themselves I think if they were thinking about it from a rival getting him and we had our striker, they would be honest about that concern, so yeah, but I'm happy with Cesco as long as we get a good left wing. But I understand the stress because people are. I think ever since we signed Havertz, I'll be honest, I do think that there's been a heightened level of stress and aggravation around our attack and our striker situation. And I think all of it is interconnected. And bringing in Havertz means that bringing in Havertz means that we didn't get this, and the rivals bantered us for it. Getting Cesco means that Havertz is going to continue to start. Getting Gyökeres is the one that the rivals are going to think is the better one. And, it's just a lot of interconnected stuff there. And so I kind of understand it. I understand it. It's not me, but I understand, Um, Blaze says meltdown over Sesko. I don't want to compare, but our legends, Vieira and Henri, came to us at the same age. Sesko then became legends. I hear you. I get the fear can do crazy things to your thinking, but the people saying Sesko is mid because they want Victor is way over the top to me. But you know how it is. And you know how the game works, right? You've been around. If you've been watching content, there's always a winner and a loser. There's always a black and the white. There's always it's always the opposite. Just like I said with, Rice and Caicedo, both players are elite in my mind. Both players are elite. Now, Declan is my player, so obviously I'm going to always be a little bit more biased to him, but the conversations around Rice and Caicedo from both sides are one is shit and one is great, and I think that that's just how it works, and from an Arsenal perspective, if you want Gyökeres, Cesco is awful. And if you want Cesco, Gyökeres shit. And that's just how it goes. But we know, especially on this channel, we're going to discuss the nuance and the context and also get all the pros and cons and not just go by emotion, but actually talk about it holistically, because that's the only way to have a conducive conversation about these things. Otherwise, it's just, why are we even having the conversation if we're going to both all act like both players are shit when we know both players are not shit? Gyökeres is a good player, and so is Sesko. Pogba says, I was so down for Gyökeres, but I'm cool with Cesco now. He's younger, faster finisher. Let's get it. Jordan says, I need that Rodrygo Saka winger duo in my veins will hit like crack. Errol says, Cesco deal will be done next week, Jess. John says, Rodrygo was tormenting City, Chelsea, and Liverpool before Vinny Jr. peaked that one season. Brian says, that's on the club, though. Signing Havertz should not be the end of the world. I hear that. Exactly. Just because he's Brazilian, everyone thinks he's a baller. It's been 30 years since Brazil were gold. I don't even know if it's because he's Brazilian, to be fair. I don't think, and I haven't seen anybody really say, and maybe you have on your timeline or wherever, whoever you talk to has said, I think Rodrygo's a baller because he's Brazilian. I definitely don't, I've never heard that, but I've just heard that we just rate him, and just because the national team hasn't been good in a long time doesn't necessarily mean that the players are not good themselves. I do think the talent has gone down for Brazil, from like the gold standard to like definitely like well below their level. That being said, that doesn't mean that they don't have players playing at the highest level. A lot of their players still play for the top teams in the world. So not quite sure what the being Brazilian has to do with anything, but Rodrygo, I still feel like there's a little bit, just a tiny bit of, if we were going for Nico Williams, then Rodrygo would be the choice. If it was Sesko, then Gyökeres would be the choice. You can't win with anything. I even saw people making videos that nobody will help us because I don't want Mikel at the club. And of course, players will help us. Let's see. Harvey says Arsenal want him because he will sell a ton of shirts worldwide, or they could just want him because he's actually really good. John says Rodrygo has bailed Madrid out more times than even Vinny. Him and Benzema were a scary duo. Jordan says Rodrygo is a baller because he's a baller. Come on, stop it. That's how I kind of feel. I'm like, who cares? There are dead national teams all over the place, but that doesn't mean that they don't have great players. Holland is in a dead national team, and we know that he's one of the best strikers, if not, the best striker in the world. Yeah, let's say one of. Forrest says, how has it been 30 years since Brazil has been good when they have won the Copa America and the World Cup less than 30 years ago? let's see. Space Time says if Teta gets Rodrygo and he stands him on the touch line, he should get sacked. Nabi says Chelsea to Sancho. I'm doing fine now without you, baby. On 350K a week. Let's pay the severance clause. Quick, says Todd. Hee hee. And Keenan says Armenia ain't never been good, and Mkhitaryan is pure class. Yeah, I don't. To me, I really don't think that they're looking at Rodrygo and they're saying, you know what, he's Brazilian. That means that he's a baller. We're gonna go get him. I genuinely think that, I feel like some of the best players that we've gotten at Arsenal have been players on the fringes of an elite side in attack. And I think they want to replicate that. And I think I know that Real Madrid are going through a difficult time and they weren't particularly great this season. But I really think we'd be kind of like maybe lying to ourselves if we didn't think that. Because obviously, if they weren't good, then beating them this season wouldn't have felt like anything, right? Because they're not good. That's why part of it, why it felt so good is that we weren't meant to win, but we did. And they had their big four. They had Bellingham, they had Rodrygo, they had Vinny Jr., and they had Mbappe. Those are top players, So yes, Rodrigo's on the fringes of that group. But he's a top player. And also he plays in the position, or he wants to, and his best position is the main position that we need to fill. Because going back to the Arda Güler comment, Arda Güler doesn't play in the position that we need, at all, or he's not in the pressing position. Pressing positions are striker and left wing. Even when you start talking about right center mid, you can't bring in Arda Güler with Max Dowman and Ethan coming through, so yeah. Let's see. Keenan says his name is Silva de Goes. He has Portuguese blood. Rodrygo is better than Saka. This was something that was definitely, I think, said before the Champions League quarterfinal. I don't know. I think Rodrygo probably has more talent, natural talent, like more, he has a little bit more, but Saka applies every little bit of talent that he has. So, if you have more natural talent and, you have 100% natural talent, but you only apply like 50% of it, but somebody that has 75 natural talent applies 75% of that, or the full percent of that, then you're better. And so I think that's usually the conversation around Saka, is that they see other players and aesthetically they look better or they have more natural talent, but Saka applies every bit of his talent. And most players can't tap into that other part because they don't work as hard. They're not as consistent, whatever, so their mentality isn't as good. So I think that's the case with Rodrygo and Saka. Saka, to me, applies his talent a lot better than Rodrygo. That being said, that can be environmental, that can be confidence, that could be quite a few things. So yeah. Let's see. Terry Tibbs says if Saka played for Madrid, they would have beat Arsenal. Dini says, where do you stand with us going for Rodgers and push Dex to the 6 rather than getting Zubi? I mean, where I kind of stand on that is I don't have a stance because that's not going to happen. Now, because Zubi is coming, unless something changes, it's happening, so the midfield will be what it is. That being said, there's still scope, I feel, for Arsenal to add an attacking midfielder on top of that to have another option. What I have said is that 4 main midfielders of a certain caliber is, I feel like, what Arsenal need to really push forward. I think having a 3 main group and then having these backups that don't really make us that much better, in my opinion, is not the best. But, if we had, like, my example was, Rice, Zubi plus Xavi Simmons, I feel that would give us the scope to get more attacking when we want to, have somebody like him step in for Odegaard, play different formations, play different ways, but we don't have that fourth midfielder in my mind. Now, Mikel does think he has that midfielder because he views Marino and Havertz as attacking midfielders at the left 8. So not only are we going to get Zubi, and the midfield will probably end up being Rice, Odegaard, and Zubi, but he also probably will not go for a different type of left center mid because that position, the backup positions to Rice, are earmarked for Havertz and Marino. So my feeling on it is I'm pretty lukewarm on it because one, it's not going to happen, and two, if Arteta has the scope to bring in that player, but he views Havertz and Marino as attacking midfielders, and the fact that he views them as attacking midfielders in his system tells you everything about how he views that position. It's not a position for a tricky flair player. It's for his box crashers, and it is what it is. Let's see. Harvey says no Marino. I think he's been great last night. Like Marino was great, amazing for Spain. Keenan says low block, El Canus, Rice, Odie. I would love for us to have an option like that. I would love for us to have an option to become more attacking against low blocks. There was a game that we played against Sheffield last season where our midfield that started was, I want to say Rice, Emil, and O, maybe. Let me check. I know Rice was at the 6, and I know that's the game that Nketiah scored the hat trick. Let me just check. Let's check. Did we score 6 goals? Goodness gracious. Freak. We scored 6 goals in that game. That's crazy. But I want to say, is this a different game? Hold on, I'm just checking. No, this can't be it because Nketiah is not on there. This is a different game. Let me go back. We must have beat them like more than once by like a shit ton of goals. Because I know it was Sheffield. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So in that game where we beat Sheffield at home 5-0, the midfield was actually Declan, Emil, and Kai. And, that's not our most sturdy midfield, by the way. We also had Zinni at the back with Kivior, Saliba, and Ben White. And Nketiah started up front. It wasn't like the best football that we ever played, but we broke down that D block. Okay. And I'm like, we didn't have that option this season. We didn't have that option to be a little bit more front-footed and to add another attacking midfielder into the mix. Because obviously Zinni is going to come in and invert, but Emil was like in the attack, like one of the forwards. And yeah, I feel we don't have that option. But I think Arteta views that option as bringing in Marino or Kai Havertz and playing them in left 8. And for me, it just doesn't feel the same. But it is what it is. Arteta always kind of struggled with the midfield where it had 1 6 and 2 10s. Always struggled. He can't get that balance right, and I'm not quite sure why that is. So yeah. Let's see. Space Time says Nketiah hat trick, one of the best hat tricks in the Emirates era. That was a very good hat trick. Nabi says, can't believe Arsenal got 25 million for Eddie. Just amazing. What about Facundo Buonanotte as a squad player? Where is he at? Leicester? Is he at Leicester? I don't know. I haven't really thought about him in time, to be honest, but maybe you guys can probably have better insight on that, but I never really felt like I watched him play that much this season. Keenan says, against the Big 6 and Champions League, bring out the big guns, Rice, Zubi, Odie, and lock down the midfield. Yeah, we have to have a different look. We have to have a look to get more attacking. So, yeah. Moving on. Let's see. So, let's chit chat a little bit about Kepa. I know this isn't the most exciting news, but it's definitely news. I want to get this over with. The backup goalkeeper, it's a nauseating conversation. It really is so anti it's not the game that I love. I don't recognize the game anymore. Like the backup goalkeeper being such a pronounced conversation feels so weird to me. But I saw people saying, "Oh, Arsenal fans are just so stupid because they don't understand that we need a backup goalkeeper." That's not what anybody is saying. Nobody's saying we don't need a backup goalkeeper. I'm not saying go with no one. I'm just saying I don't want to talk about it like it's the most important thing. It's we could be securing our goalkeeper situation for the next 8 seasons. We need to secure our striker situation for now. We need to start, do our left wing for now. You know, we need to fix shit for now. The goalkeeper situation, there will be another Juan Garcia that pops up in the next 3-4 seasons that we can go get. There will be. I promise. There will be. There will be another Juan Garcia that we can go get in the next 3-4 seasons to take over for Raya. But what we can't do is focus so much on the goalkeeper situation, which we have done in multiple seasons now, where the goalkeeper has been almost like it's been so prevalent and so consistent, and it's just nauseating. Just get someone competent. When I say get someone, I'm not just saying go get Runnerson, which was nightmarish, but go get somebody like that when he plays in the Carabao Cup games, when he plays in whatever, games, whatever, that he's not going to be out there in the middle of the pitch by the halfway line diving like Neto. Just do that. Make sure he's not cup tied. Make sure he knows his role. Because I'm not a big fan of the idea of two number ones battling, because I think that it just causes commotion. And I don't think goalkeepers, I know that goalkeepers now are more modern and they use their feet and stuff, but I think they still kind of want a number one, number two situation. And none of our rivals, correct me if I'm wrong, have a scenario like this. I know that people are like, yeah, but the number two goalkeeper for Man City is almost just as good as Ederson. No, he's not. Until Ederson started showing his CTE, like, no, it was always Ederson was the number one. Don't gaslight me. He's good. He's a good number two, but he was never battling it out with Ederson. It's like, don't piss me off. He was never. Liverpool, it was just Allison. Kelleher, who I think left them, right? Went to Brentford maybe, was a great number two goalkeeper. Good number two. But was he fighting it out with Allison? No, he wasn't. Who has this scenario? That's a top team, not Brighton, not Brentford, Arsenal, Liverpool, City. Which one of these teams is doing this nonsense? I'm sorry, Inaki Kanya needs to sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Take a seat. Nobody wants to hear about this. It's just not practical. It's just not practical. I hated the beginning of last season with this, Ramsdale Raya thing. It gave me nightmares. It traumatized me. I don't want this anymore. So just give me a backup goalkeeper. Mix Mitchell says, yeah, you need a cheap number one. It was weird when Arteta was saying stuff about subbing goalkeepers mid-game. It was shocking. I was just like, bruh, we have bigger problems, much bigger problems than needing to switch the goalkeepers. And I think sometimes he says things just to say them. And I don't know if I fully believe that he meant what he was saying then, but like, sir, enough. Don't piss me off. Can't we just bring Brunnerson back to be the backup? Don't piss me off. Fabianski, come home. Callie says Arteta always lies. Foxy says Kepa as a backup keeper on 150,000 pounds is pretty mad. I think there's rumors going around that he lowered his wages to 65,000 pounds a week when he went to Bournemouth. So I think that's coming into play as well. But Kepa needs somewhere to play regularly anyway. That Bournemouth loan was good for him. He says goalie and defender every single season got me exhausted. I'm glad we are now focused on key areas this time. And again, my point is not that we do not need a backup goalkeeper. I know we need it, but like, can it just be simple and not this big drawn out thing? There will be another time and another goalkeeper that we can bring in that can take over for Raya. We know, and goalkeepers, they get old and they can still play until they're like 32, 33, 34. So we're really not on the precipice of like Raya becoming a granddad. He's not going to just fall off tomorrow. This is a two-time Golden Glove. Like, it's okay, And I think Raya is, to me, right below that like elite class of goalkeeper. And I do believe that at some stage Juan Garcia will be in the Allison bracket. I think that's why people were upset. But focus. Focus. I just want to shake someone. Shake someone. Focus. We need a striker, So I get that Juan Garcia is going to be special, but like, come on now, Let's see. Space and Time says Kepa's situation was similar to Sterling. Half his wage was being paid by Chelsea. Keenan says 5 million is a solid deal. Sen Lamens and all the youth top European prospects are 15 to 20 million. And I just feel like we can do that at another time. I just feel like you can do that another time. Mr. Mister says if we get Kepa on reduced wages and that scratches Arteta's Chelsea itch, I'll take it. It's a number 2 goalkeeper. If that's the Chelsea, pain that we need to suffer, that's the pain that's better than Nkunku. I know somebody said that earlier. It's much better than Nkunku, like seriously, because that guy is still hanging around and I'm like, I need him to find a club not named Arsenal, because the longer it goes, I'm like, that cannot be a market opportunity, Just going back to the Cesco thing, Ben Jacobs says that Arsenal continue talks with Leipzig over Benjamin Sesko with a bid possible soon. Cesco is keen on the move to AFC. Victor Gyökeres is still under consideration as Andrea Berta is keen to advance multiple options before officially bidding, but Cesco discussions are much more advanced. Arsenal feel both Cesco and Gyökeres can be secured for about 70 million pounds. Girl, let me get it together real quick. It's Friday and my brain is short circuiting. 70 million euros. And Gyökeres, am I going to say something right today, or is it just going to be like this? Gyökeres remains open to Man United, even without Champions League football, as revealed yesterday, even though Man United haven't yet made an approach to Sporting to date. So that is probably the situation summarized by somebody who's reading the same things as us. No offense to Ben Jacobs, but 70 million euros is not 93 million pounds, people. That's cheap. That's cheap AF. This is what I'm saying. I do think Berta used the fact that knew we could go to Sporting and get Gyökeres for like 60 million, 65 million pounds to leverage that up against Cesco, because they knew that Cesco wanted to come to us. So it's like, well, we could just walk away and go get Gyökeres tomorrow. So are you going to negotiate or what? Because you're not getting 93 million pounds. Edu would be still struggling to get this shit done, by the way. He wouldn't, he didn't have the juice. Berta, I'm liking that. I'm feeling like we got, I feel like that's good to hear, because obviously I'd love for us to be able to just splash the cash, but you still need to save a few coin, here and there. So 70 million euros is what, like 62 million pounds or something like that. That's a fucking steal. I like that shit. So yeah. Let's see. For CZNZ says Man City had to be bought by a state to win trophies. You won the lottery. You didn't earn any of your trophies. I think you guys are talking to the random City fan here. The Arsenal perspective says Edu would be rounding up to the nearest 100 million euros. I think he'd just be sitting there. You know how like he would just take so long to get things going. Let's see. Isaac says Cesco, no, Gyökeres is the real deal. Nuances says 73 for Cesco is not chump change. It doesn't say 70 million or 73 million, though. It says 70 million euros, which is 63 million pounds. That's not the same as 73. But I get it. It's still expensive. It's not cheap. But you listen. You're paying for potential. That's all I'm gonna say. Kanema says, "What do you think about Malik Fofana from Lyon for cheap?" I was actually looking at him this morning, um, and I wouldn't mind bringing him in. Him and Rodrygo. You know, um, I would prefer him as the third attacker to Sane, because he can play on both sides. He's fast. He's tricky. He wouldn't be too expensive. I know Liverpool were also looking at him as well. So yeah, I would take Malik Fofana cheap. I mean, go over there and offer them like barely anything because they're in financial issues, but like 25 million pounds for somebody like Malik Fofana, I'd definitely do that if we had, some extra money hanging around for sure. But we're not quite there yet. Mark says, I wonder what the Gyökeres fanboys will come up with when he looks average at United. You know what scared me? And I know his opinion is not the only one that matters, but my biggest fear with Gyökeres is that, I was watching James B and Ben Madison's um scouting report on no, it wasn't really a scouting report, but it was like a transfer show or whatever. And I think they're going to do it like every Monday or something. And they were talking about Sesko and Gyökeres, and he said something that shook me to my core. And I was like, this would be my biggest fear about Gyökeres. Now, this is just somebody that is an actual scout, is his actual job, right? Ben Madison is not somebody just like, a fake tactico. He's quite literally a scout. And he was saying that like as a scout, he views Gyökeres as somebody that would come to a West Ham and make West Ham really good, would score lots of goals for West Ham. And it scared the shit out of me. I was like, because that's the exact type of player I'd be afraid he ends up being. Like like when Nottingham Forest was interested in him, I was like, Nottingham Forest are not a bad side, but we're not Nottingham Forest, So yeah, definitely that shook me. Like I was like, okay. Like, and this is what I'm saying, like an actual scout was saying this. Now he could go to United and bang, because not, it doesn't mean that we're right. But the fact that people are not even saying that they have concerns and they're just looking at the numbers and they're like, well, of course he's gonna bang. I'm like, but what if he doesn't? It's so scary. It's so scary. It's so scary, So yeah, there's pros and cons to both for sure. Edu would wait until the last day and then bring Hosalu. Yes, exactly. Like that's exactly what I'm saying. Like Edu would be acting like he's the big guy, like with on Instagram, like doing the barbecues and eating charcuterie boards with his family, trying to look like he's all relaxed and shit while everything is falling apart and we don't have a striker yet, or he's being sold to another team or something like that. Like he was unserious. Josh says it's ridiculous that clubs are now paying for potential that doesn't get fulfilled. Dembele at Barca or Sancho basically everywhere. I mean, those are 100 million pound, 80 something million pound, signings. I think most teams are spending quite a bit on potential, and a lot of it does work out. Some of it doesn't. You have to make an educated guess on what's going to work and what's not. And just because some people's fail doesn't mean ours is going to fail. And obviously says Cesco, tall, easily been a painter, but for football. Cesco, tall, easily been a painter, but for football. Nuances of Fate says, let's wait until someone flops to actually call him a flop. I'm saying that for both. I think there's, again, I'm presenting the argument that there's pros and cons to both, not that there aren't cons to Cesco. Cesco has some cons too. His biggest con is that he is young. That is his biggest con is that he's young, and so you are paying for potential, and it has to work. And that he's somebody that's going to need some development, and he's probably not the guy as soon as he lands, so that is a con to him. And it's a big con for a club that feels like they're under pressure to win something big tomorrow, right? And then the biggest con for Gyökeres is that a lot of those goals came with the Portuguese league. And if you don't actually say, if you are actually ignoring that, I feel like you're a little liar. You are a pretty little liar, because ain't no I can not a single Arsenal fan could tell me that that does not worry them at least a little bit. Just look a little bit, you know. But listen, Kepa, um cheap, Chelsea, yearly deposit. Here it is. If that's the one that it is, that's fine. Um, so, I would take him on the cheap, just to, like, let's just stop talking about the backup goalkeeper. That's all I'm saying. So yeah. Um, Now the last thing that I kind of wanted to just like briefly touch on before, we just chit chat for a while, is this Greek Messi, which I know you guys like that name, don't you? I know y'all like that name. I know you guys like that name, but this player has been coined the Greek Messi. And I don't think I think they're just being funny. I don't think we have to be like, oh my God, they're calling him a Messi. That's just the worst. Like, it's fine. We don't think he's actually Messi. But Gunner Blog has says that Arsenal are interested in 17-year-old prodigy Konstantinos Karatzis, but with a price tag of 30 to 40 million euros, the urgent needs in the first team, it's complicated. And he goes on to kind of talk about, can Arsenal strike the right balance between win now players and development signings, which is a very, very good conversation to have, because we are talking about Cesco as well, right? And so um it's something that I've probably, you know, complained about from the club for a couple years now, is that we are watching our rivals set up base camps for scouts in different markets so that they can have a stronghold in those markets to get that emerging talent. We're seeing them buy other clubs to use them as feeder clubs. We're seeing them develop players in their academy and selling them for 15 to 20 million straight from the academy. We're seeing them have different ways of developing and buying talent, because sometimes developing talent to sell it, like, in turn gives you the money to buy better talent. So all of those like little arms that you have out there working for you make you a much stronger team when it comes to building your first team, which is why you do all those things, is to build the first team. And Arsenal never really seemed to have the wiggle room available to do the other things. I would love to. You remember how we got to a certain stage where I would be reporting on these like young kids that we were interested in, and like the instant response would be, we're not getting them, like, because we would never get them. And that's just, we even had like Nipan or whatever, and he ended up, potentially going Aston Villa. They're saying that that has fallen apart, but I do think, even though we have things to do in the first team, we should still be able to look towards the future. And that's where, having players that you send out on loan to your academy, you sell them for decent money, like, Amari Hutchinson leaving Arsenal, going to Chelsea, and then they get to sell him for 20 something million to Ipswich or whatever, or Huddersfield or whoever it was. We're missing out on so many different opportunities to build through the first team, whether that's getting these types of, talents, this like Karetzis type of signing, or Naipan or whatever, and having those players for the future. It just feels like we can't strike the balance, because it's such an emergency always to do the first team, and there's only just ever so just like enough for the first team. And so with Sesko, I think that's also the problem, is because it's win now, it's win now, it's win now. But as we've also seen with teams like PSG, who to a certain extent were also in a win now, because they've spent $1 billion and they've been desperate to get the Champions League, that even though they were desperate to get the Champions League, they kind of threw away this situation where they needed to bring in these super experienced players. They had Messi and Neymar and Mbappe, and they got rid of all three of them, brought in players like Barcola, who some Arsenal fans do not want, and Desiree Doué, players like that, relied upon players from their academy as well. and won the Champions League. And so I do think there's room for us to have younger players in the team. And as long as they're talented, if you're good enough, you're old enough. And we should still be looking at these young players that could potentially be world beaters and bringing them into this team, and also like with the Dowmans and that kind of stuff to make sure that we're still building for the future. And these types of deals can cut down on us feeling like, oh my God, we missed out on Wirtz and he cost 130 million. Oh my God, we missed out on, whoever the fuck. Now we don't have this player, so I think it's an interesting conversation because of the situation that we're in quite literally right now. Um, there is room for younger players. It's just about, are you talented enough? Do we have the right balance in the team to, because people are like, oh, well, you know, we have a young team. Do we? Is our team young? It's not, it's not 3 or 4 years ago. This team is old enough. Gabrielle is 27. Did you guys miss that? Gabrielle is 27 years old. Ben White, 26, 27 years old. Odegaard and Rice, when Zubimendi comes in, they're all 26. We are not a young side. So bringing in young players doesn't necessarily mean that you're not adding quality. It just means you're adding players without the level of experience. But again, PSG didn't have a problem doing that. They don't have an incredibly old side. They played up against an old side and whooped their ass because it was just about having the necessary talent. I think we conflate old or experience with talent, and we shouldn't. We should go get the most talented players we possibly can, whether their age is whatever or whatever, and feel like we can build a team full of talented players, even if they're 21. It should be fine. But I'm not necessarily saying just for this Karetzis guy, because I don't think we'll get him. He plays in a strange position that Max and Ethan already play in. But I feel like we should still be able to get these types of players and bed them into the team or either loan them out and sell them to build for the first team, because that's what all good teams do. But almost every team that we look at has these types of young players in their team, and it's not an emergency. It's only an emergency for Arsenal. And I'm like, why? Nabi says, Sesko, I want everyone to look up to me, cough. Ivy says, it's a great idea, but I get PTSD after a company recommended one to us. I mean, we've also bought in old ass players and they've been shit as well. Let's not act like we didn't just experience Sterling. We didn't experience Willian as well. We brought in Cedric, who had all this experience in the Premier League and ended up being ass. I think there's a sweet spot, where it's not about age, it's about talent. Sambi ended up being a misfire because we trusted the opinion of a blockhead. But better scouts should be able to identify players that will be able to adapt to the Premier League. And I just think, as mean as this sounds for Sambi, I just feel like he's unserious. I just feel like he was unserious, and Kedia having to set you straight just shows me that you're unserious, and I don't think that's just about him being young, I just think that he's just unserious, so yeah, not also, like, buying, like, somebody like Mudryk has not stopped Chelsea from buying Estavo. They bought Estavo, they bought a bunch of young players that some of them are gonna be great and some are not. But ultimately, they have Estavo and Andre Santos coming into their team next season, but if it was up to Arsenal fans after they bought Mudryk, they wouldn't have bought those players, because buying young players means that you're not gonna be good, So must win to me is not about just buying older players or players with quote unquote experience. I think it's about buying the types of game changers, and sometimes that exists within a 21-year-old, or sometimes it exists in a 26-year-old. But shying away from top talent because of their age, for me, is tough, especially when the foundations of Arsenal have been built on having young players in the team, young, really good players in our team. So we're throwing that away, and I'm not quite sure why. Dio says we'll never get Isak for 20 million or 70 million, but we might get him for 150 million. Nabi says all the Arsenal deals should be completed in 4 days. Josh says Cesco signing has potential to be great long term. The problem is that it is assumed that signing comes with excuses. If Osimhen, Gyökeres flop, the can be no excuses because of their track records. Josh, let me throw this at you. If Arteta needed to win now, then he wouldn't have went for Sesko. We're talking about there won't be any excuses, but we're assuming that if he fails this season, that you want him not to have any excuses because that's going to mean something to the board and then they'll sack him. But what did I say a couple minutes ago? That it's already come out from the Athletic that Arteta's not under pressure to win a trophy next season. That is far from the truth from the minds of the board. So I think I get it that we're frustrated and we want Mikel to have to be put to the sword. So if you get him Jokeris and then he fails, then it's just on him. But if Arteta felt like he was under pressure, he wouldn't have bought Kai Havertz because that's a vanity signing. If Arteta was under pressure, he would have walked after last summer because not getting a forward or whatever would have meant that his season would have been ruined and he would have walked. Getting Sterling, that would have been just catastrophic for him. If he was under pressure, he would not be pushing for Sesko. He would be pushing for Jokeris. So I think we think of it from a perspective of we want Arteta put to the sword, but he's not going to get put to the sword because the board does not see him. Don't have his feet to the fire at all. They don't, So as much as I get what you're saying, and I get that, you want him not to have excuses, the excuses are irrelevant because he's not under pressure right now. So he's going to go get the players that he feels like give him the best possible chance of winning in the next couple of years. And that's Cesco, So yeah, I mean, I know you're saying then I guess we're finished, but it's just that's why the sacking conversation and constantly going back and forth about are you Arteta in, are you Arteta out, unless the fans, and this is not to put pressure on them or to shame them or anything, but unless the fans that go to the games decide not to wear merch, not to go to games and to agitate and protest and all that kind of stuff, it's not going to happen. And yes, there is a small section that went to the final game of the season and made their discontent known, but the majority of the fans were there clapping and saying, yeah, I'll give them more time. When the Athletic did their usual article about our fans happy about where we are, the majority of fans are happy with what we're doing. So as long as that's true in my mind, I have to keep a little bit of my sanity. I can't be hinging on Arteta in, Arteta out, because I know that if he doesn't win anything this season, he's most likely still going to be our manager the season after. And, isn't that kind of obvious? Because if the Cronkies were concerned about winning, they wouldn't have never hired him to begin with, because a club that's serious about winning, if they had Ancelotti and Luis Enrique available to them, they would have never chose Mikel. They're not concerned about winning. They're concerned about something else, and I know that that's morbid and kind of but it's just the truth. If they were actually wanting to win, they would have got a winner, That's all I'm saying. Rogerio says, I think the great problem is that the Kroenke doesn't have a winner's mentality. He only chases profits. Our owners don't care about trophies. As long as we have UCL, Mikel ain't getting sacked regardless of success. I promise you, Mikel will walk before they sack him, which is why I'm So at this stage, I'm thinking, okay, so we need to win with Mikel. So what does Mikel need in order for him to get over the line? Johnny D says, now you're hallucinating, Jess. A winner brings them money. It's obvious that they thought the best choice to reconstruct and make them winning is Arteta. Sure. I mean, you could think about it that way, that they thought the best manager to bring in was not anybody experienced at winning or being at a top club, is to bring in a novice. Yeah, I guess you can think that the best choice for that would have been Mikel, but ultimately, if they say that he's not under, and this is coming from the Athletic, again, this is coming from the James McNicholases and these guys that are close to the club, they're getting word from the club that he's not under pressure. So even if that was the truth back then, which I don't think it is, I think they knew that Arteta was what matters to them the most is they know if they get somebody that's connected to the club in some way, the fans will be more patient. They weren't patient with Emery because he had no connection to us, but Arteta hasn't won anything, but Arsenal fans are way more lenient with him because he used to play for Arsenal and he's an Arsenal man, right? They get him in, they get a young manager in so that you get more time, whatever. He is a Pep light, and at that time, Pep was the best manager in the league. He probably still is the best manager in the league. So you get to play that style of football and he has good ideas. But at this stage, if they're not even contemplating getting rid of him after 5 seasons, even if your original idea was he's the best to construct, is he the best to take you to trophies now? Surely they're thinking about that, So yeah, but I think, listen, Josh's comment, I get what he's saying. And you should get Gyökeres because the thought process is that if you can't win with Gyökeres, then it's you and it's not the team. If you can't win with Cesco, you're going to have the young player, kind of thing. Well, I don't even think they're thinking that way. I don't even think they're thinking that way. I don't even think that that is crossing their minds. I think they want Arteta to get the players that he wants. And that's just the end all be all. I think everybody's kind of in bed with him and that's just kind of how it is, So yeah. So yeah. Blaze says, I think some Arteta fans will turn on him if he won't win trophies next season. Let's see, because I don't trust this fan base. I think a lot of them are more concerned about protecting their opinion rather than changing your mind as new information is available to you, which I feel like is normal. But in this world, especially with so many of us being online and whatever, the offline fan base, I don't know how they feel. I feel like the offline fan base, a lot of them are going to the games, and so the only way that they can show their discontent is by not going. So I would need to see no butts in the seats kind of thing, right? But from the online fans, a lot of them are just like, I said from the beginning that I believed in him, so I'm going to stick with that. Or I said from the beginning that I don't believe in him, so I'm going to stick with that. But I feel like as the information changes, then maybe your stance should change. And for people to be such staunch believers after 5 seasons, I don't know how your feelings couldn't have changed. So yeah, I think it's difficult because people are very binary about the way they think about things. That's why I never feel bad about my views changing, because outside of that first full season where he didn't win a game and he had us in like 15th in Christmas, pre-ESR and Saka, I thought he should have went. I think most managers do get sacked during that time. I think Arteta has actually started a trend of clubs keeping managers longer, because back then, if you went through a run like that, you're getting sacked. You're gone. You're done. But now, clubs are trying to keep managers longer and all that kind of stuff. But that was probably the first time that I was like Arteta out. And then he switched it around at Christmas and was playing ESR and stuff. Next season, we finished 5th. Was disappointed, but we go again. Then we had the title race. That was great. Thought from here we win next season, even though I was disappointed with the way that we collapsed. But I could rationalize it by saying that we've never been in a title race before. And back then we were young. 3 seasons ago, we were like the youngest team in the league. And then the next season rolled around. And then that's when I started to be like, I'm worried now. So now I'm worried, so yeah. But yeah, I do think that we should be able to bring in young players, and they've just announced that Jorginho is left for real. So, because I think he did his medical. So, but yeah, I do think that we should be able to bring in young players. I think young players can lead you to titles if they're good enough. We've seen it with other teams. You just have to be talented enough. I do think Cesco will surprise people at, the fact that you're just having a traditional number 9 in the box will get you goals. somebody with just the natural inkling in front of goal, somebody that's good aerially, that's a good striker of the ball. If you don't think Cesco could score some of the chances that Kai Havertz missed, then I don't know if it, I don't know. I don't know. But I do think that he's a really, really good young player that will contribute early, especially he's like a flat track bully as well. When he played against like the not so great teams in the Champions League, he was getting hat tricks, and that was for Salzburg and Leipzig, so what is he going to do with us? I do think that people are thinking about it from the perspective of like either he's going to be really good or really shit. And no, Sesko probably isn't the finished article, so he won't be perfect the first season, but will he score goals? Absolutely. Of course he's going to score goals. You got Marino and Kai Havertz scoring goals for Arsenal, and they're not even strikers. So what do you think a real striker is going to do? Simon says, we are still young and the best is yet to come. Kwame says, Blaze definitely in runners up 4 times in a row. Definitely insane being runners up 4 times in a row. The only reason match going fans protested a lot before was because other clubs were protesting something big. We might see apathy and some boos, but no one is protesting Arteta out for now. I agree. I just don't see them doing it, but we shall see. David says, I'm telling you, Sesko is not even going to start over Havertz if we purchase him. Arteta is all in on Havertz. I doubt we will see him start that much in the league. I mean, he probably won't start from the beginning. That's definitely for sure. But you're not going to invest 60 something million on a player that's not going to play at all. And I think again, we're just thinking about it from the perspective of I just want somebody who's going to bench Havertz. And I kind of thought about Gyökeres like that. I'm like, he's definitely going to bench Havertz. But of course, we know Sesko is going to play. There's going to be plenty of minutes to be had. There's early stages Carabao Cup. There's early stages FA Cup. There are games in the Champions League that will need to rotate. We'll actually have somebody that, hopefully because Jesus is never fit and Nketiah's was not good enough, somebody that can actually give us a good option for rotation. So maybe he doesn't start every single game, but maybe he has a John Duran type of impact for Arsenal. So I'm thinking about it from that perspective, not just about starting. Spacetime says, I really don't like fans already saying Sesko better score 20 goals. So unnecessary. Sesko better score goals. We're done building. AP says Sesko will go 007. Kwame says, David, you're right. Arteta pick his favorites, Havertz over Sesko. I mean, yeah, Havertz is going to start the season. He's going to start the season. But I'm hoping that what this means for Arteta is that if we are winning, by 2-0 or 3-0, he'll feel comfortable taking him off, and playing somebody else, because that's one of our bigger problems is Arteta doesn't know when to rotate and take people off, so hopefully having like Rodrygo and Cesco would mean that if we're winning 3-0 or whatever against some of the, not so great teams or whatever, then he'll feel comfortable taking Saka and Kai off and bringing in Sesko and Martinelli or whoever, and we can still look good, So, yeah, says Sesko scores 18 plus 18 goals minimum, especially if Havertz gets 14 in the system. I mean, he's gonna eat against those smaller teams. He's definitely a flat track bully. He's definitely somebody that will score against bad defenses and guys that aren't, particularly big. He's going to eat against those, so Cesco easily bags 20, 25 goals, all comps with a good game time. Yeah, so we'll see how it goes with Cesco. I think that, it's going to take quite a bit for people to come around. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of fans that really do like him. And then there's going to be some that prey on his downfall, and then others that are just a little bit more like in between. So we'll see how it goes. I don't think for either one, by the way, that all fans will be on board. I think there's enough green and red flags for both of them that there's always going to be somebody that's a little bit side-eyeing it. So it is what it is. It's up to them to show, like Raya did, that they're the guy, So yeah. David says this is pure blind faith. I mean, it's not necessarily pure blind faith because that's why you have scouts and you have data to show you, give you the best case scenario and kind of be able to map out how good a player can be. It's not blind, it's not complete blind faith. You can discern, a player and what they can give you based on the data and based on actually scouting. That's the art of scouting is you look at a player and you can say, okay, in this scenario with better players in a different environment, playing in this system with these players and this blah, 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 they can do this. It's not just blind. It's not just blind. Spacetime says all that slow tempo shit is related to preventing injury. You wouldn't have to do that if you actually rotate properly. Nabi says Cesco has the power to beat the keeper from 25 yards. David says data shows 13 league goals in the Bundesliga. If that's like the only data that you looked at, then fair enough. You just don't want Cesco and you don't want any of the other context or anything around it, to explain why a player that takes less touches than Holland and the best strikers in the world can still manage 13 goals in a system that he's not even prioritized in. But you don't want any of that context because you just don't think he's any good, and that's fine. But Arsenal are not just looking at goal tally and deciding that the player is good enough. Again, I hope you never wanted Isak. If you're saying that the data shows 13 goals, then I'm sure you better have been saying, well, Isak only scored 4 goals, so I don't want him. Do you want Isak now? So obviously the data isn't just how many goals you got before you got to the place that you're at, right? So, but that's all you want. You know, I feel like the conversation is just way too binary and it's Sesko shit, Jokeris is the best, and that's the only data that I'm going to look at when there's clear red flags for both and green flags for both. I just cannot have this conversation. It's just so strange to me. 88 miles per hour says after 15 games this season, Arsenal were 7 points off the top. That was a sign. I usually look at the table after 7-8 games to see where it's going. I think there were early signs of a drop off for sure. And I know I voiced concerns. I know a lot of people in the chat voiced concerns, but it was kind of just met with like hand waving. We're saving we're saving our whatever, our best form for the end of the season. So, there's nothing to worry about. We'll make it up. And then it ended up, we got to January and it was like, wow, we really look off of it. The draws started to pile up. Arsenal need a good preseason and they also need to start the season well, and they'll probably do much better than what they have done. But I think it was kind of obvious early on, and it just didn't help that in like the first 10 games of the season, we had played 10 men down, or not 10 men down, 1 man down, 10 men, like 3 times, so you could see it. You could see it. You could literally see it from like the first couple games that we didn't look like ourselves. What we look like when we're flowing. And we just never got to the flow state, and hopefully we can. Mata says, good afternoon, Jess. Hope you're enjoying the political drama unfolding in your country. It's really like reality TV. I love a bit of drama. I don't like to do politics on channel, but it's dark. That's all I'm going to say. Adatile says, Jokeris or nothing Hive is so binary. It's giving old man shouting at cloud. I just feel like it's giving unserious. I think you can want Jokeris, but you also have to recognize that there is a school of thought that the Portuguese league, for attackers doesn't necessarily always translate. It doesn't mean that Jokeris is going to fail. I think, having time at Coventry does make me think that he can play in English football. But the fact that no other top teams really went for him when basically outside of City, like you have Chelsea, Arsenal, and Liverpool, and teams in Europe that also need a striker, and they're not knocking down his door. That's scary to me, especially with the fee being very obtainable. But it could be like it could be a red flag, or it could be a tricky situation where you have like an obvious player that you should take a punt on and only one team takes the punt and it's an obvious good choice. Like there's just a lot of gray area there where you can interpret it in so many different ways. And I think that's why the conversation can never be one is bad and one is good, one's a slam dunk, one is an air ball. Obviously there's gray area there. So it needs to be talked about. It just cannot just be one is great and one is bad. It can't be. Not with the players that we're talking about. We're not talking about, oh, do you want Lewandowski or do you want Dominic Calvert-Lewin? That's not the conversation that we're having. G. Will says Havertz is not a center forward. And if the plan is to start Havertz at center forward ahead of our new striker, then we're already in trouble and should concede the title to Pool, City, even Chelsea before the season starts. Well, that's dramatic. I'm all for a bit of drama, but that's quite dramatic. Most Wanted says we can't always get what we want, but we do need a striker. Gyökeres was my top pick, but I guess I'll settle for Sesko. Yeah, I mean, it's not great that you're saying settle, but I get what you mean. If you wanted Gyökeres, then you feel like, well, okay, we're getting Cesco, and I can understand that for sure. Let's see. David says, unserious is challenging for a title with a 21-year-old striker with 13 goals in the Bundesliga. I mean, again, if that's all you care about is the number of goals that you scored, fine. That's cool. Chelsea and Arsenal are both going for strikers that had maybe a quarter of the goals that Gyökeres has, but all of their scouts and all of the data that they have is wrong. And we all, like Twitter and YouTube fans, know more. Fair enough. No top teams are going for him. So are their transfer teams just all stupid and the only people that are smart is United's? I'm concerned that we're just kind of not seeing the bigger picture, but who cares? Well, the proof will be in the pudding. We will know the results. Mark says, why are all the Cesco haters here? I think, people are just concerned about not getting a ready-made striker, and Gyökeres presents ready-made because the goals are there, and he has the hype around him. So, yeah, and I kind of understand it, but if you're completely ignoring the context around both players and you're like, this is obviously going to work, even though he plays in the Portuguese league and, those 13 goals represent a shit player at 21, then we're not speaking the same language, and that's fine. Inner Circle says, who is already prepared mentally for the next season? I'm not. Are you guys prepared for next season? I'm not even remotely ready. Mentally, I am done. I need to get through my transfer copium dopamine before I even get close to, to that, so I'm not ready. HFT says Cesco is Nunez 2.0. I don't know if you put this in the comment section like a week ago, but this makes no sense whatsoever. Cool comment, but it makes no sense whatsoever because Nunez was hyped a lot. He scored a shit ton of goals in an inferior league and then came to the league and those goals did not translate. Does that sound like Cesco to you, or does that sound like potentially Gyökeres? How is Cesco and Nunez similar at all? Because Nunez had the goals. Remember, when Nunez first got here and they played in the Community Shield, it was Haaland versus, Nunez, and Nunez came out on top because he scored a couple more goals. He was actually hyped. Everybody thought that he was the guy. Remember, he could have went to Atletico Madrid. He could have went to Barcelona. He chose Liverpool. And they paid like 86 million for him. And he had a shit ton of goals. So that to me makes no sense whatsoever. Comparing him to Cesco when Cesco is not hyped, he's not really wanted by the fan base. He doesn't have a shit ton of goals to show for it in this season. The Gyökeres is actually more similar because they're coming from the same league, so that makes no sense. Sorry. Also, Cesco is an actual striker and Nunez was never a striker. And one of the bigger problems that Nunez had is that he was more of a winger or just a regular forward, and he was never a 9. He was coming off of the wing a lot, something that Gyökeres tends to do, by the way. One of the bigger concerns about Gyökeres, again, because there are concerns around Gyökeres, I think he's a great player, but he likes to come off of the wing. He doesn't really play central. So the guesswork that comes with Gyökeres is how is he going to translate from playing a 3-4-3 or, coming off of the wing and really kind of operating those spaces and then playing for Arsenal that plays against deep blocks and things like that. I actually think the more that I say it, Nunez and Gyökeres are actually a much, much better comp. Much better comp, but that's just me. Salah Udine says, Cesco reminds me of Kane or Crouch. I can see it already. That's a huge, gap there. Kane or Crouch. Not like Crouch didn't have a respectable career or anything like that, but very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. So yeah, Editayo says, Sesko played second striker this season, just behind Openda, by the way. Context matters. No, Editayo, no context. No context. You do not apply any context. Just go with the plain stats. Does he have enough goals? Those are the only stats. Just use those. Jeff says, I'm still checked out of the club, to be honest. Just here for the vibes. All my energy is going into the WSL next season, although I still have concerns. Nabi says, Sesko, the beast from the East. Let's just, listen, the truth will come out. We shall know. The chances of Gyökeres ending up in the Prem is very high, So we know the Cesco is going to probably come to us, so we will know. That being said, at the very least, can I just ask you guys not to pray on his downfall? I think that's kind of like the worst possible thing is that there always is like a subsection of the fans that just because they want to be right, they kind of prey on the player's downfall. We saw it with Havertz. We saw it with Raya. And I really hope it doesn't come with Cesco, because if you want him to score goals and you want him to do well, just like in regular life, you need support, and I think it would be nice for a 21-year-old not to look online and have death threats and, whatever. So even if you're not excited about him, let's just not, do the super toxic thing. I really don't want to hear about the nasty things that were being said about him. Let's just be normal, just for once in our lives. Tulia Singula says, how far is Sesko to Arsenal? I think, it's like negotiations, but it's not like done, but it may get done next week. Mishek says, would Sesko agree to Arsenal? Yes. Blaze says, nobody using context when it comes to Arsenal. There's context applied to both strikers, but at this stage, we're probably only applying context to Cesco, or at least talking about Cesco, because it doesn't look like we're going to get Gyökeres. So, Nabi says, take a bit to take Cesco down. Cesco is miles ahead of Nunez. Goals, shots, assists. Cesco is better. More shots and more chances created. The gap is actually clear. I think if you're playing in a really dominant side and you do well, that's great. But RB Leipzig is a strange team, because I know that Red Bull are very adamant about playing in a 2-striker system and stuff, and that's fine. But Cesco was playing as like the facilitator to Openda, and I don't know if that's because the coach just saw him as a better technical player than Openda, so he kind of took the best of the worst case scenario and was like, I'd rather Openda be running into the box because Cesco could probably get it to him, but I don't trust Openda to get the ball to Cesco. And essentially you see Cesco very deep outside of the box, not a lot of touches. And the way I think about it is we take the most touches in basically Europe inside the box. Cesco is nowhere near it. But he's still able to score goals, he's still able to get shots off with very little prioritization. They're not actually feeding him. A lot of the goals that he has to score are just moments of brilliance, like the goal that he scored against Bayern is just a random moment of brilliance. That rocket that he scored against whoever it was, I can't even remember who it was, but it was from way outside the box. It was just a moment of brilliance. most of his goals are moments of brilliance. They're not necessarily these well thought out attacks where, a number 10 is just threading the ball to him. If he does get lucky and Javi Simmons feeds him, that's great. But for the most part, he's trying to feed Openda and also trying to eat himself. And he's still able to get 13 goals in a pretty poor Leipzig side from this season. That's how I think of it, but a lot of other people just think of it as, well, he was just shit, and he only got 13 goals. So that means he's going to get less at Arsenal, which I also think is strange because Leipzig is nowhere near as good of a side as us. And if he's getting 13 goals there and he's not getting a lot of service, then what do you think he's going to do when he gets a lot of service for us? I still don't see how people are getting to he's ass. But yeah, but I'm also trying to do good, like decent research to see, how now the things that I feel like he can improve upon are, being more intentional about his shots. I think sometimes his shots can be a little lazy. I also think he can do better back to goal. I think he needs to, I think because maybe he doesn't see himself as a big man, he's not somebody that uses his body the way a 6'5" person should, which is good because then he has a good touch and he has more tech because he doesn't see himself as a big man. But hopefully Arteta can help him develop in the duels per se. I think he can do better there. Outside of that, I think he has all the things, 88 miles per hour says the point of Nunez comparison is ridiculous, actually laughable. Radiant and Dyer says a bit behind, but I just heard her say Nunez wasn't really a striker when the other Arsenal channels say that about Cesco because he plays in a 2. No, that's not what I said. I said Nunez wasn't really a striker, not because he played in a 2, but because he just isn't. He just isn't a number 9. He's more of like a winger or somebody that he does play in a 2, mostly because, and he's mostly the guy that goes out wide. So my comparison for that is like Gyökeres also likes to exist out wide. He's somebody that his best qualities do not really, he's very quick. Remember, Nunez was like very fast. He would go off on the side. Like, go watch old comps of Nunez at Benfica. His heat map was always on the left-hand side. So he wasn't really like a traditional number 9 that likes to exist in the box. Gyökeres is quite similar. Now, Leipzig do play in a 2-striker system, but Cesco is an actual number 9 that the system doesn't really suit that. They like the Red Bull system all the way from the bottom all the way to the top is a 2-striker system. Doesn't mean that he's not playing striker. It just means it's a 2-striker system. One is usually a facilitator. The other is usually the one that's running into the box. What doesn't suit him is not the fact that he's in a 2-striker system, and that doesn't mean that he's not a striker. It's that whoever the coach is has decided that he's going to be the facilitator and not the guy running into the box. For Arsenal, he's going to be the guy running into the box. He's going to do the Openda role. And if we do play a 2-striker system, somebody else will be playing deeper. But for somebody like Cesco, who is quite literally a striker, it doesn't suit him not to be playing in a 2-striker system, but to not to be the guy running into the box. And that was my point. Victor says, not because if I was a Chelsea fan, not because if a Chelsea fan says Palmer over Saka because Palmer has more GA, Arsenal fans would disagree correctly so and use context, but then use GA when comparing Sesko and Gyökeres. I think GA is a hard thing to GA, I think, is a really good indicator of like a player like how good of a season they're having at like a plain view, but you still have to look at the other things, you have to look at the other stuff. I just don't think you can just like simply look at it, especially when you're looking at, are these players going to be good for Arsenal, and not look at the system, the environment, how dominant that team was, how many deep blocks they come up against, things like that. I think you do have to look at the context, but that's just me. GA is a misleading stat. GA is a lazy stat. Muse says, check Don Hussam's stream. He shows how Sesko compares to Nunez with his stats. I don't need to see how he compares with the stats. Actually, use your eye test. One was just always on the left-hand side, heat map, scores lots of goals, very quick, but is not a traditional striker. We always talked about how he probably should be playing out wide. In fact, there were times for Liverpool that he played left wing because he's not a natural striker. Cesco is a natural striker that was playing a facilitator role for Leipzig, and that doesn't suit him, yet he still got 13 goals this season. John says, what about Jesus if GA is not that important? Also, you have to remember that Hussam, his narrative is that Sesko is shit because, Liverpool were lightly linked to him. And so he's going to utilize anything he can to his narrative next season will be that Sesko and Nunez are the same. Nobody else is using that comparison but him. I think it's really, really convenient for a Liverpool fan who hates Nunez to use Nunez as a comparison to Sesko to get Liverpool fans and fans in general to think that Sesko is not good. If your narrative is that Nunez is shit, isn't it a convenient narrative to compare Sesko and say that they're similar? You guys are not reading him like a book. Hussam, he's a great content creator. I love him down, but no, it's not passing here, my friend. Mata says, don't forget Hussam also hates Zubi. Josh says, Bruno has great GA compared to other midfielders, but that doesn't mean he's considered the best in Europe. You also look at players like, Vitinha and Pedri, who are considered best midfielders in the world. And I could say probably pretty confidently that they have less GA than Bruno Fernandes. So it's not the clearest stat. I think for a striker, you do look at it. Goal scorers, you do look at it. But, when there's so much cloudiness around the system, how they play, then you have to look at all of the things. Victor says, Don Hussam as your source is crazy. MM says, one thing I worry about with Cesco, most of his goals came from teams in the bottom 9. They did come from teams in the bottom 9, but I'll also say that it's a good indication of him being a good player that I think he scored like 3 goals against Bayern. So he has scored goals against Leverkusen and Bayern. Maybe he hasn't scored against the other teams, but he has scored against those 2 teams. Jay says, Don is so scared. I watched him talk about Cesco in the summer and was raving mad about him, saying he would love him at pool. I have to go back and look and check the tapes. Johnny D says, I told Hussam I'm keeping the receipts. That Ekitike bullshit is better than Cesco. I'm all over that. He will not escape. Listen, you got to build up your narrative for the season. Like, maybe he truly does believe Cesco is not as good as Ekitike and he's so similar to Nunez. But I don't, because first of all, Nunez is not a good striker of the ball. He's not particularly great. He's just somebody that, to me, he never really looked like a traditional number 9. And Cesco definitely is. But, if your narrative next season is going to be that Chelsea is better than Arsenal, then the striker has to be probably the difference maker. So you got to say that Ekitike is better. Listen, I guarantee that when we get on Judge Mo's channel, the narrative is going to be Chelsea are going to finish higher than Arsenal. Are they going to challenge an Arsenal or not? Because they chose to get Ekitike versus Cesco. And that's fine. I think Ekitike is a good player. I think he's a good player. But one thing that I'm pretty sure that Hussam has not probably spoken about because it doesn't look good for his player is that Ekitike consistently underperforms his XG, which is a key trait of players like Gabriel Jesus, players that miss big chances a lot and they underperform what they should. Cesco, a player that you guys are saying is not good, overperforms his XG, which is the kind of performance that you see from players like Harry Kane. So when I'm looking at a striker, and one of the key metrics that I do look for is whether you overperform or underperform your XG. That tells me whether or not you're the type of player that is going to make low XG chances into high XG chances because you have great ability, or you can do a lot with a little. Somebody that needs a lot and is still not performing is a red flag for me. But somebody who can do a lot with a little is a green flag for me because that's what Kane does, and Kane is elite. So do I want the player that performs more similarly to Jesus, or do I want the player that performs more similarly to Kane? if we're talking about metrics and similar to Nunez and things like that, you know? So I'm pretty sure he didn't utilize that one. But for a striker, you have to look at, are they overperforming or underperforming their XG? Because that gives you a good indication of how they utilize their chances. And maybe a team like Chelsea, it won't matter because they'll have a player like, Delap coming off of the bench and they create quite a few chances. But for a team like Arsenal, we need a player that's going to overperform their XG. We don't need another Jesus. So yeah. Yo-Yo says surely Champions League and to a lesser extent international stats are better reflection of both Gyökeres and Sesko as opposed to their domestic efforts. Regardless, I care more about left wing. I mean, yeah, I can see that for sure. I mean, for me, having 100 goals at 21 years old, I just don't know if that's like a normal stat. I don't feel like it is, or else we'd be hearing about it more often. He is a goal scorer and he has all the elements. He just needs to do it consistently. And I just don't want a striker that consistently underperforms their XG because to me, it's just giving Jesus, but yeah. Lamy says Cunha also overperforms his XG. I also think Mbomo does too. Good goal scorers overperform. Bad goal scorers underperform. Like, I just feel like that. I feel very like that's how I view, strikers. Nabi says Cesco will have less to do at Arsenal, unlike in Germany where he has to work for his goals. He will be given them here. Most of his goals are individual moments of brilliance. They're either like bangers from outside the box, or he has to do a lot of work getting into the box and then getting past defenders and then putting in the back of the net. He doesn't get the tap-ins that, Havertz gets for us, or, the aerial, like the good corners and things like that. But he's great aerially, so he's definitely gonna score quite a few goals. Is he perfect? No. Ruak says, literally yesterday, Mo was saying we have the worst midfield out of the top teams in the Prem, even with Zubi. I mean, that's fair. Everybody has their narrative and that's fine. I don't think our midfield is worse than everyone's. I just feel like we're Arsenal. So yeah. Radiant says, who was the last player to get 20 goals and 10 assists? I don't even know. What is this leading? I guess you have the answer, don't you? Mata says, Mbomo is so class. Johnny D says, stop the Jesus hate. He started to bag like Don Juan in a camp filled with... Okay. Ruak says, if Sesko starts every Prem game, I bet he bags 20 goals minimum. Victor says, Ekitike is great for Liverpool. They're built around the false nine creative-esque player. It'll be interesting to see what team he goes to. But like I said, I don't think Ekitike is not a great player. That's definitely not what I'm saying. I think he's he tops a lot of the charts for the type of stuff that people really look for, like, creative stats. And he scored quite a few goals, so it's not that I think he's bad or anything like that. I just feel like Cesco is being underrated because he's going to Arsenal, and that's just, and the narrative is that Arsenal have to get a 20 goal per season striker, but Ekitike and Cesco have the same amount of matches, and Ekitike has a few more assists and a couple more goals, but it's not like Ekitike scored 20 plus goals. So it's not like he's a 20 goal per season striker. And last time I checked Frankfurt were like much better than RB Leipzig this season. So, but I could be wrong. Let's see. Leipzig finished 7th and Frankfurt finished 3rd. So he was in one of the better sides. And he probably has like 5 more XG, or sorry, 5 more GA than Cesco, a player that people are saying is shit, so I don't know. I'm just looking at it from that perspective, but it's not like he has 20 something goals. He has 15 and he's had those for a long time. Once Marmoush left, he fell off a little bit. Let's see. Benjamin Sesko His take-ons are really high, his aerials won are pretty good, his passes attempted, so he did pass quite a bit, progressive carries are good, you know, he's done well in a team that really suffered, and like I said, he had 13 goals and his XG was 10, so he's overperforming his XG. Last season, his XG was 7 and he got, 14 goals, so he doubled, like, that's kind of mad, like, his expected goals were 7 and he scored 14 goals last season. So again, he's consistently overperforming his XG with very little service. I like that. Leonide says, Nusa goal looked sick. Italy sinking. What's the score of that game? Charlie says, I test Ekitike fits Arsenal. We don't have a profile like him. I mean, this is my problem though. With the Ekitike looks like eye test says that he fits Arsenal is that you guys want another player that probably is not going to score a lot of goals, but looks good, So I feel like I want a traditional number 9. I really don't want another Jesus, and I feel like that's kind of what he's going to be like. But, people like that, they like the way he looks better. So fair enough. Taku says Ekitike gives me Isak vibes if he gets a proper manager. Johnny D says, I made her read that Jesus True had a period of the year and a half where he didn't know where the goal is because he had the wrong approach. He changed the approach in November, super striker. When Yeri will love playing off Cesco anytime they're on the pitch together. MM says Marmouche carried most of the XG that Ekitike has. But yeah, I mean, there is, we're all three of us are probably going to get a striker, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, and even Man United will probably get a striker. We'll see how it goes. But, I just don't think he's as bad as people are making him out to seem if you actually watch him. And he does all the things we're really asking for, good ball striking, good aerially, can make something out of nothing. He may be young and stuff like that, but he has those things. But if you want the more aesthetic, because you want to harken back to the olden days, I can understand that too, Combination play will be crucial next season. Ekitike is a big reason why Frankfurt finished third. I'm sure he was. Goyan says Rice or MLS in midfield. Who had 14 goals out of 7 XG, Sesko or Ekitike? Cesco. Cesco had 7 XG and scored 14 goals. And then this season, he had 10 XG and scored 13 goals. He gets way less than anyone else and still does so well. Dio says, great, let's someone else buy Ekitike, not my Arsenal. Charlie says, Jesus was always a winger. Only Mikel wanted to make him a striker. Fact, go watch him under 1920 Junior World Cup. Jesus was a killer winger. I really like Cesco, but I worry Arsenal fans won't give him time and Havertz benching him after 10 games. Johnny says, oh, Ekitike is shit. That's all I wanted to know. I don't even think Ekitike is shit. I just think there's some things in there that make me feel like he's not like all the other stuff is great. The link play and all that, but we need a striker, and we need someone that has that natural goal scoring ability. And I feel like Ekitike, he can score goals, but it's giving Jesus. Cesco is meant to bring back the feeling of Arsenal having a certified marksman. Chagoon says, people forget that Leipzig aren't good, so he's actively playing in a weak side. And Goyan says, who do you pick, Rice or MLS? Probably Rice. I mean, I think he's earned that left 8 spot to a certain extent, so why would I change that? But I'd like to see MLS play there a little bit. Johnny says, well, if people call Cesco shit, so can I call something else more shit than Cesco shit? Can I? I mean, you can call him whatever you want to call him. And HFT says, I feel like you are backing Cesco just because we're getting him anyway. No, I mean, if you go back to my original videos when it felt more like we were going to get Gyökeres, I said the main reason why I want Gyökeres is because he's probably more of a finished article, and I don't feel like the fans will give him time. We need somebody that will probably just bench Havertz. That was a big reason for it, but I like Cesco. So it's not about either or for me. My narrative always was that I like both, but Gyökeres, the main thing was fans will give him more time because they'll feel like he's ready to go. I also like the fact that Gyökeres is coming off of a title-winning season, so he'll feel good being the guy. He'll have the confidence, and he'll bench Havertz, which was a big thing for me because I don't want to see Havertz starting. But because I like Gyökeres, that doesn't mean that I don't think Sesko is good. There is a world where you like both players and you can see the pros and cons of both, but you have to hate one. And it's so unserious. It's just not realistic that with every single player, it's either one is shit and one is great or whatever. But I'm not going to say that somebody that I already thought was going to be one of the best strikers in the world in the next couple of seasons, that I'm not going to be excited about signing that player. It's impossible for me to be unexcited about a player that I rate, so I just can't do it. I just do not have the ability to hate a player or pretend like a player is bad because I need my narrative to stick or whatever. So, no, I'm not just backing him because we're getting him. It's because I always liked him. And there's plenty of videos out there with that. But I also like Gyökeres. But I also didn't lie about there being red flags around Gyökeres. I still think that Gyökeres is a good player, though. I actually think if we got either one, we wouldn't be bad off with either one, to be fair. But I really, really, really want the left wing to be a good player, a top player. And that's actually been more of a concern to me than the striker situation, because whether we get Cesco or Gyökeres, I think we're going to eat. Whether we get both, I think we're going to eat. I really do. Let me just look at this real quick. Like Odegaard got an assist, right? Oh, that was a great assist. That was nice. All right. So, but I get I understand the if you are stark about I've watched Sesko and he's shit, and I've watched Gyökeres and he's great, fine, But I also think, knowing Arsenal fans and knowing like Premier League fans in general, I don't think many people have watched full 90s of either player, to be fair. Johnny says, so if we get Sesko, Gyökeres, you are not that pessimistic anymore, are you? That's all I need to know. I'm not saying all that. It still depends on the left wing and all that, but I'm not feeling as like the left wing to me is so important. Like, I think that actually will be the biggest upgrade that we can have. I think our left wing is basically like a desert. HFT isn't listening at all. He's already made up in his mind and can't accept Sesko is the worst player in the world. I mean, I just think that most people online are either doing one is way better than the other, or one is crap and one is good. And so if somebody's not doing that, then it's a problem. But, because if you want Gyökeres, you have to think Cesco is terrible, and I just don't think he is. I haven't seen enough of either player to like or prefer one. I just need someone ready to help Saka Odie to go up another level. Well, if you just watch the assist that Odegaard put in for Holland, I know it's international football, but it still applies that whenever we have a runner, Odegaard's much better. I just feel like we're so stagnant, and we need somebody that makes good runs, good runs in between, so that we can find them. When Calafiori made a run in one of our Champions League games, Odegaard found him. I think it ended up being offside, but it was a great pass. When Rice ran off of the defense and made a run, he scored, and I think that was against Newcastle. We need runners. We really need runners. We need somebody that's not afraid to make those dynamic runs up front. I know that everybody says Havertz's best quality is his movement, but we need more. Trey Smooth says, I don't think anyone should be mad with either. As long as we get a recognized striker, we should see improvement. I want Rodrygo bad. We need a star level to inject. That's where I kind of am as well. I think with either striker, we're going to see an uptick. Of course, the pettiness in me does not want to see Havertz start games for Arsenal Football Club next season, but I'm willing to accept that if I know the left wing is a level raiser, because I feel like that's the biggest upgrade we can make. Blaze says Odegaard play with the best striker. This is why he got an assist. At Arsenal, we don't have strikers who can score goals from Odegaard pass. And Arteta needs to let him access central spaces. I think this whole avoidance, like I was on YouTube and then a comp came up of when we played against Chelsea and we beat them like 5-0 at the back end of last season. There was not a single time it says, you know, everybody says like Odegaard just stands in Saka's space. He is central the whole time. He was central the whole time. You saw it was Partey and Rice were in a double pivot, basically like a double pivot. You know, Rice was still shuttling back and forth, but his position wasn't naturally high. It was much lower. Partey was at the base and Odegaard was in central spaces and he was just killing them. He was killing them. He was popping up on the left. He was popping up on the right. He wasn't standing in Saka's spot like everybody said, but he was central. I don't know why we've just disbanded that whole way of play. I don't really get it, but anybody, whether it's Ethan or Odegaard or anybody, will benefit from us playing with more of like a natural 10 in a central area rather than playing with Odegaard so far to the right and Rice so far to the left and high. It just doesn't feel right, you know, but that's just me. Teotize says the stodgy football is giving AFC fans a migraine. Charlie says, don't know why people don't like Havertz. He's the perfect second striker. His movement off the ball is world class. Josh says, Jesus up top gave us fluid football, but with Kai up front, we've been rigid, boring football. Johnny says, if moving like a something is his best quality, then that's rough. We're in for some tough times. People that said Havertz's best quality is his movement are highly dubious. And KDB said he loved playing with Sterling because he actually runs. And so we need people to run. And there was also some clips that I saw of Arsenal where there were players that were making runs and we didn't make the pass, whether that was Odegaard or whether that was, you know, Trossard when he was on the ball or, you know, Rice or whoever was on the ball, maybe took a little bit too long to, or just didn't have they just didn't make the pass. And so we need to take more risks. We need to be more, you know, like adventurous, you know, so with our passing, that's with everybody need to make more runs and be willing to make the pass. And so, yeah, but listen, guys, we've talked ad nauseum, you know, whoever hates the long streams is going to hate this one too, but it's okay. John Cross says Arsenal is getting the green light to sign Benjamin Cesco for 60 million. I mean, that doesn't sound like 93 million, you know, we will see. But yeah, that's not a bad fee for the future best striker in the world, you know? So, yeah. What are people sending me? I think people are trying to, so I feel like many people have sent me that assist because they know how I feel. They know how I feel. Victor says we need players to run and players to recognize those runs, period. Odegaard can't be our only creator. That was our problem last year. Trossard is not at the level of a playmaker. I do think that Rodrygo helps this because he is a natural creator. He is kind of like a number 10 or creator on the wing. And so if you replace the Trossard and the Martinelli with a Rodrygo type, you will naturally get more creative. There is no changing Rice from who he is. He's never going to be, you know, a Santi Corzola, but, you know, the quality that he adds is just something that we can't afford not to have on the pitch, in my opinion. So if you're going to play with Zubi, who I think we saw yesterday can add some creativity as well with his line breaking passes and, you know, the way he sets up things and speeds up the tempo, the place to add creativity is at left wing, you know, so hopefully that's what happens. But make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel on your way out. I am going to, you know, enjoy the rest of my Friday. Cazorla. I'm sorry, not Carzola. Cazorla. I'm sorry. But yeah, make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel on your way out. Last few days have been super fun. Let's keep this thing going. Tomorrow, unless there's like big news, you may not see me because I'm doing stuff, but Sunday we will maybe reconvene. So yeah, make sure you guys, like I said, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.